welcome back to Katie's Favorite Recipes. Today I've got 3 great one-pot meals that are perfect for busy weeknights. These all 3 fed my family of 4, plus it gave us all leftovers for each recipe, so I really like that. It made weeknight cooking a whole lot easier. This recipe is a one-pot taco pasta, and I topped it with my favorite salsa. And then this next one is a Southwest chicken and rice recipe, and I topped it with fresh cilantro and Monterey Jack cheese. This last one is a cheesy chicken and rice recipe, and these are all 3 so simple. I think you all are going to love them. Starting off with this taco pasta, I'm just going to start browning my meat. So I've got 2 pounds of hamburger meat here, and I am going to cook this all the way through. I like to mash mine down into really fine pieces, so that's the way we do it here. If you want to leave yours a little bit bigger, feel free to do that. But once we get that finished, we're going to let it cook all the way through, and then we are going to strain out all of this grease. We don't want to let this recipe come out greasy. So next, I'm going to add in my taco seasonings, and I'm just doing 2 of the taco seasoning envelopes of my favorite seasoning that I like. You can do any kind you want. I'm just following the instructions on the package to that. So I'm going to add my water in like it says, my seasonings, and then I'm going to cook this for about 10 minutes until all of the water's cooked out and it glazes onto the meat. So that doesn't take too long. And then once we finish doing that and we get it all stirred up really well, we're going to start adding our chicken broth or beef broth. I'm using beef broth in this. I did 4 cups. And then next we're going to do our tomato paste, which I did 3 tablespoons of that. And I'm just going to stir that around really well, make sure it gets mixed in. If you wanted to add a little more tomato paste to this, you could, but I feel like 3 tablespoons for us was enough so it wouldn't be overwhelmingly tomatoey. And then also I did 1.5 cups of milk, and I'm going to do 2 tablespoons of Worcestershire sauce. And we're just going to mix this up and let this get really hot. We want it to start boiling before we add our pasta. So I'm doing 1 box of these pasta shells here. And if you wanted to do a different kind, you could, but I just really like these in this recipe. So we're going to dump that right in there once it's boiling, and then we're just going to stir it up really well. We want to make sure that all of this pasta is covered in our broth. That way it will all cook evenly. So we're going to stir it around really good, then cover it up and let it simmer. And about halfway through, you can stir this to make sure nothing's sticking. I think I did this maybe 2 or 3 times stirring just to make sure and check on it, see everything was cooking. But we're going to stir it all up and let it finish. And once your noodles become tender the way you want them, then you are really done with this recipe. If you wanted to add in a can of Rotel with chilies or something like that, you could do that as well. That would probably be good, but my family isn't too crazy about tomatoes, except for me, so I put salsa on mine whenever it was done. And it turned out really well. But anyways, we're going to add in our 4 ounces of Velveeta cheese. And then I did about a cup of Monterey Jack. If you want to do more or less, feel free to do that. But we're just going to dump this right in here once the shells are fully cooked. And we're going to stir it up and let all of this cheese melt. And I checked on mine in about 5 minutes and the Velveeta was still not fully melted. So I stirred it up, I covered it back up and let it finish melting the rest of the way. And then once the cheese is melted, this is ready to serve. So this was super good and it was really easy. This was perfect for a busy weeknight. It didn't take long to throw it together. So I think you all are going to like this. And like I said, I topped mine with my favorite salsa and it was really good. I feel like it was a game changer for this recipe. So now that we have finished this one, we're going to move on and we're going to do our 1-pot Southwest chicken recipe. And this one is also equally simple. We are just going to start by chopping up 2 large chicken breasts. If you want to do a little bit more than this, you can. But I'm just going to chop these up into about 1-inch squares. And if you wanted to do chicken breast tenderloins or some kind of boneless chicken thighs or something like that, you could do that in place of chicken breasts. But I'm just using 2 large chicken breasts today. And once I finish chopping those up, I'm going to chop up 1 small onion. I'm just doing half of it today, and I'm going to save the other half for a different recipe, but I am doing this chopped up finely with my small chopping blade on my chopper. And after I do that, I'm going to cook my onions in some butter. If you wanted to do olive oil instead, you could do that. But we're just going to let these get kind of soft and flavorful before we throw our chicken in here. I also did add some salt to it. That's optional. You don't have to do that. But we're just going to stir it around and let it get just a little bit of a char on it. Don't feel like messing with that, then you don't have to. Just go ahead and throw it all in there together. But now I'm going to add my chicken in here. And I'm just going to throw it in there, and my pan was up a little bit high, so I had to stir it up so it wouldn't burn before I added my seasoning. So make sure your pan isn't too high to where it's going to burn everything before you can add your seasoning to it. But I am doing 1 packet of fajita seasoning. This is the kind I'm using. I actually had a second packet on hand, and I ended up sprinkling that over everything when it was done. So if you want to get a second packet, you can do that. It'll just add more flavor. Once I've got that sprinkled on top of my chicken, I'm just going to stir it up really well and let this chicken cook all the way through. We want to make sure that all this chicken's coated in this and make sure that, all of the juices run clear on our chicken. We don't want our chicken to be undercooked once we add everything. So I'm just going to cover this up and let it cook. And we want this liquid in here to kind of become a glaze and glaze all of this seasoning over top of the chicken. So once we do that and we let it all finish cooking, we're going to add in our black beans, which are drained and rinsed, and then our whole kernel corn is what I'm doing. And I also drained that, and I did 1 can of the corn and 2 cans of the black beans. And I'm going to dump this in here on top of my chicken, and I'm going to stir it up, and then I'm going to add in my chicken broth. I did 4 cups of chicken broth, and then we're going to start adding in our rice. I'm using instant rice, so my measurements are 4 cups of broth to 4 cups of rice. If you're using anything other than the instant rice, then you need to adjust your rice and broth ratio to match that so this will not come out watery, but I'm using instant. But we're going to make sure that all of this is stirred up really well. We want to make sure all of the rice is covered in this liquid, and then we're going to cover this up and let it cook. And then that is it. We're going to serve this, and I put mine with cilantro and Monterey Jack cheese, and it was super good. We loved it. Lastly, we're going to be doing our cheesy chicken and rice, and I added broccoli to this. So I am doing the rest of that half a small onion that you seen me use earlier. I'm using the rest of that now, and I chopped it up really fine, and then I'm going to do my broccoli. So I just bought a bag of the broccoli florets that's already broken off the head, and I am just chopping those down into the smaller sizes that I like. Next, we're going to start chopping up our chicken, and I did 1.5 pounds of chicken breast tenderloins, and I just got those cleaned up, and I diced them into small bite-sized pieces. You can use whatever kind of chicken you want for this, but this is how I'm doing it. And then next, after I finish chopping all that up and getting it cleaned up, we're going to start cooking everything. So we're going to go over to our pot, and we are going to start cooking our onion. I do have olive oil in the bottom of this pan, and I'm going to cook my onion until it starts getting soft and charred a little bit. I'm going to add some minced garlic to this as well, but I'm not going to do a whole lot. I'm going to do about 1/2 to 1 teaspoon, and I'm just going to add that in there. Once it gets fragrant, I'm going to start adding my chicken, and we are going to cook that until the chicken is fully cooked all the way through. So we're going to stir that up and let everything blend together. And I'm going to start adding some seasonings to this as well. I didn't do a whole lot of seasonings, but I am doing Mrs. Dash original. And then I'm doing salt and pepper to taste. I also did the Mrs. Dash to taste, just until the chicken is good and coated with that. So we're going to go over it a couple of times and stir it up to make sure it gets on all of it and let it cook all the way through. Once that's finished cooking all the way through, we're going to start adding our chicken broth. I did 3 cups of chicken broth, and I ended up adding just a tiny bit more towards the end, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But I'm just going to add this into the pan, and I am going to start adding in my instant white rice. I am doing instant white rice, so if you use any other kind, you need to probably adjust your liquid to rice ratio a little bit. But we're going to add our 3 cups of instant white rice, and we're going to stir that up really well. And then we are going to cover this up and let it cook for a little while. Once it's been covered and cooking for about 5 minutes, we're going to start adding in a little bit more seasonings to this. So I did 1/4 teaspoon of onion powder, and then I also did black pepper to taste, and I also ended up doing more of the Mrs. Dash original. And we're just going to go over that with that and stir it up really well. Once I finish doing that, I am going to start adding in my broccoli florets to this, and I'm just going to pour them all in there. And my chicken broth all cooked out of this at this point, so I just added a little bit more, like 1/4 cup to 1/2 cup to this, just to help that broccoli steam a little bit. That's optional, you don't have to do it. But I'm going to stir that up and cover this and let everything cook until your broccoli is the tenderness that you want. I tasted it and at this point decided I wanted to add about 1/4 teaspoon of salt. I went ahead and put that in and stirred it up. Next, after I finished that and my broccoli was done, I went over everything with sharp shredded cheddar cheese. If there's a different kind of cheese you would like to do with that, that's perfectly fine. This is what I did. I did about 1.5 to 2 cups of this. If you want to wait and do this to your bowls individually when it's finished, you can do that. But we're just going to go over this really well and make sure that the top is good and covered with this cheese. And we are going to let this melt down. And that's it, guys. I hope you all enjoy these recipes. And again, thanks for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe. Enjoy!